Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be discussing Skyler Bell, wide receiver out of UConn. We're going to go through his production profile, his injury history, his offensive environment at UConn, his play against ranked competition, some advanced stats, take a look at some interesting tidbits I found on X of him, talk about his strengths and weaknesses while I show you some all-22 film of his, talk about where he might go in terms of real-life draft capital, as well as where we might potentially be taking him in our dynasty drafts. And then finally, what we can expect out of him as a player. So watch to the end of this video and you should have a pretty good idea. Taking a look at his athleticism, it's pretty nice. I mean, we have a 4.40 40-yard dash time, which is 91st percentile. When you height and weight adjust that for a speed score, he gets a 101.0, which is 74th percentile. Good number there. Where he really excels, though, is in the burst, the vertical and broad jump. He had a 136.2 score, which is 98th percentile among collegiate wide receiver prospects. Didn't do the agility drills at the combine, but did end up with the 10-2-3 catch radius, which is 82nd percentile. Now, he did this while being about 6 foot, 192 pounds. Both height and weight are firmly decent numbers for a wide receiver prospect. Definitely not, tiny like, Tank Dell or Josh Downs, for instance. Does have 34th percentile arm length, so that's not a particularly great thing for him. I'll get into how that potentially affects his game and in terms of some of his strengths and weaknesses in a little bit. But he is going to be about 24 years old right now. We'll get into his injury history and kind of his path to the NFL in a minute here. Talking about his dominator rating, which is his market share of the team's yards and touchdowns at UConn. He had a 39% there, which is 81st percentile. Level of competition is something you can use to contextualize this. He's not playing at an elite school, so, a really good player, which I do think Skyler Bell is a very good player. Those types of players should dominate, so it does make sense. His target share of 31.8% is 94th percentile. The same thing kind of applies when you're playing at a school like UConn. In terms of breakout age, decent breakout age of 20.2, which is 59th percentile. Not otherworldly, but definitely encouraging to see from somebody that's not going to be on the younger side of things as a prospect, that at least, he didn't break out at a really advanced age or potentially not at all. Getting into his production profile, you will see he started out originally at Wisconsin. He did have to redshirt due to injury. We'll get into his injury in a minute here. So in 2021, we just saw one target, one reception for 15 yards. Nothing to see there. Moving on to 2022, when he did return from injury, 54 targets, 30 receptions, 444 receiving yards, and 5 receiving touchdowns. Then in 2023, still at Wisconsin, 58 targets, 38 receptions, 297 yards, and 1 touchdown. So a little bit of regression there. Transfers to UConn, we see an uptick in usage and overall stats here. 93 targets, 49 receptions, 856 receiving yards, at a career best 17.5 yards per reception, and 5 receiving touchdowns. Then really took off this past season at UConn, 141 targets, 102 receptions, 1,282 receiving yards at 12.6 yards per reception, and 13 receiving touchdowns, to go along with an easily career best PFF receiving grade of 85.1. Detailing his injury history, as I mentioned, in year one at Wisconsin, you saw he only had 1 target and 1 reception, right? Well, he ended up pulling his left hamstring in August 2021 in the preseason, lasting until October, then re-injured it again, which essentially shut down any hopes of having a true freshman season at Wisconsin and producing. So it's not as though it was a talent issue necessarily. It was that he was injured. So hamstring injuries are worrying, but really only so much when they're recurring over time. Anyone can have a freak hamstring injury and then re-aggravate it. If you don't see it recurring repeatedly, I wouldn't put too much stock into it. Then in 2025, started but did not return to the game after the opening series. And then in January of 2026, battled a quad injury in the East Best Shrine Bowl week, preventing him from playing in the showcase game. Overall, this body of work in terms of injuries isn't really concerning to me. A freak hamstring injury with a re-aggravation and then minor injuries does not concern me in the least. Now, getting into his offensive situation, specifically his quarterback play, I was pleasantly surprised. He received, per PFF, the 20th best PFF pass grade in terms of his quarterback play at an 80.8. And, when you take a look at some of the All-22, there is decent ball placement in general. It gets a little bit lackluster on some of these deep ball attempts, admittedly. But in general, when receiving some of these short and intermediate area targets, the ball placement was pretty good. Moving on to his play against ranked competition, this is the first prospect in which I've scouted this offseason that didn't play at least one game against ranked competition, so there's nothing to see as far as that's concerned. Admittedly, he is at UConn, so it's not as if he's playing at Ohio State and then playing against a bunch of teams that are lesser than them. But that is something to note. But, on a positive note, there really weren't any games in which he was entirely shut out. I mean, you could argue his 8 for 70 game against AFA, or potentially his 6 for 54 and 1 touchdown game against Buffalo. You could argue are his worst games, and at least he wasn't shut out entirely. So the production was pretty nice this season. Admittedly, though, we didn't really get to see him against a bunch of ranked teams to get a better idea as to how he'll play against better players. Moving on to some advanced stats here, I took a look at FBS wide receivers with 50 or more targets. That was a sample size of 200 players. Bell ran 409 routes on the season, which is 94.2%, so a full-time wide receiver for them, obviously. In terms of his specific deployment, he played in the slot 25% of the time, and out wide 74.7% of the time, with a little bit of backfield work, which you'll see in the All-22 in a little bit. Taking a look at his yards per out run, his 3.13 were tied for 6th in the sample size. His 0.12 first downs per out run was 23rd in the sample size. I'd hope that would have been a little bit higher, admittedly, with the level of competition in which he was playing, and the decent quarterback play, at least in the short to intermediate parts of the field that he received, but still a good number. His yak perception of 8.2 is tied for 9th in the sample size. He is a pretty good yak guy. I'll get into how he does that and where there are some of his strengths and weaknesses, specifically as to his yak ability in a little bit, though. Taking a look at his missed tackles forced, his 15 were tied for 36th. Taking a look at his contested catches, he finished with a 65%, 13 out of 20. Now, one thing I'm going to mention is that when the ball is placed, into his chest or, right along his shoulders, he is able to come down with the football a lot of the time. It's really more so when he has to extend out for a grab that a lack of play strength, in my opinion, kind of comes into play here. And that also factors into some other parts of his game, which I'll mention when I break down some of his strengths and weaknesses when we take a look at the All-22 in a minute. But overall, this metric kind of surprised me. There was a very impressive one-handed grab in traffic, which the ball wasn't really high up or anything, but a very impressive catch. But I would not have guessed he would have had a 65% rate, to be honest with you. Taking a look at his targets, he had 141 on the season at 10.8 per game. Really good number. Turn that into 102 receptions at 7.8 per game. Pretty efficient. His yards of 1,282 rather at 98.6 per game are really good. And had 13 touchdowns at 1.0 per game because he played in 13 games this season. Moving on to something that's extremely positive here. He scored 137th out of over 3,900 total wide receiver prospects throughout the course of these years in terms of his RAS score. Very impressive, 9.65 for him, including elite grades in terms of the speed and explosion aspect of his grades. The size grade was graded as poor. I mean, he's 5'11 and a half, 192 pounds. That's a perfectly reasonable size, depending on how you're going to be deployed at the next level. I don't think he's going to be asked to be a boundary X, so I'm really not too worried about the size aspect here. And I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon members. Thank you to Big Hunt, SP, Mage Jack, Infamy MTG, AOYOB, The Dawn, and Any Buckeye. Thank you guys. I'm doing this full time now, and without your support, this would not be possible. If you'd like to become a member, I'm going to leave a link in both the comment section and description of this video. You'll receive not only, but including access to a Discord where we have a channel where we have NFL and college football talk, as well as a channel where we have fantasy football talk, and a third channel where we laugh at poor trade offers that we've been offered in fantasy football. But if you'd like to, you can always DM me with private, questions if you don't wish for it to be known by any community members. But you'll also get help with building your fantasy football teams every year. I'll use wins above replacement, as well as just looking at the general lineup and scoring settings to help you with your teams each year. I'll help you with trades that are advantageous based on those factors as well. You'll be part of a fun and growing active community. You'll not only receive access to videos early guaranteed, but you'll also have the ability to ask for personal videos that you and only you can view. Or potentially, if you'd like something to be shown on the channel, you'll have preferential treatment there as well. So please consider becoming a member. I'd really appreciate it. Let's get back to the video. While some All-22 clips display some of what I'm going to be mentioning here, I'm going to read you a brief, around 3-minute synopsis of Skyler Bell. So Skyler Bell is a wide receiver out of UConn who profiles, in my opinion, to have the potential for Z and slot work at the next level. He stands at 5'11 and a half and 192 pounds, so size really isn't a hindrance to him. As far as size, speed and burst are concerned, he has above average speed and acceleration, which will be assets to him at the next level. When given free releases, he can quickly be devastating, as he separates quickly when he is not able to be disrupted by physicality. Now, one issue I see is his ability to beat press, which can be an issue for him as he uses extra steps and fakes to try to win against physical cornerbacks, which disrupts the timing of his routes. And I think this is in part an issue because of a lack of necessary play strength to beat press, which admittedly can be improved, but will need to be improved if he's going to be an X. And once again, I think he can be a Z or a slot and is effective there and has a requisite skill set to do so. So it's not as if he can't do anything. I just don't think being an X would be particularly great for him given his strengths and potential weaknesses. Moving on to his route running ability, he was used a lot on crossers, an occasional out and up, quite a few jet sweeps, a lot of screens, some go routes, slants, sluggos, seams from the slot, a lot of comeback and stop routes, and the occasional dig, which highlights his vast diversity in usage and his overall versatile skill set as far as potential deployment is concerned. And I think that's going to be one of his biggest strengths is his ability to separate. As far as his hands are concerned, he has no issues catching clean balls and can make really tough contested grabs where the ball is near his chest or shoulders, even one-handed grabs in traffic. But he does struggle to make tough catches away from his frame when he has to extend his arms out. And that kind of goes back, in my opinion, to the shorter arms, which I believe were about 34th percentile. I think that is going to be an issue for him. So I don't think he's going to be your jump ball X in the red zone type of receiver, but that's fine because he has plenty of other skills to make up for that. And mentioning those skills, as far as his yak ability is concerned, I think it's a plus for him, as he makes good use of his blockers in the screen game and on jet sweeps to provide necessary leverage to gain additional yardage. He can change direction really easily and efficiently while kind of maintaining some of that speed, which is pretty impressive, and can hit you with a good jump cut when necessary. But I don't think he'll be breaking a ton of tackles at the next level and almost certainly won't be trucking anybody. I don't think he doesn't really have the build and the play strength to be doing that. And overall, I think he'll be a number 2 or 3 in an NFL offense and has the yak ability to be dangerous with a creative offensive coordinator that puts him in motion to create matchup advantages / allow him to get a head start off the line. Heavy usage in the screen game and potentially gives him some carries on the ground as well, and a sort of Jaden Reed type of role that we saw from Reed as a rookie on the Packers. Moving on to where he might be drafted. In terms of projected draft capital, depending on where you look, it's anywhere from round 2 to round 3. I think this is appropriate from somebody that I don't think is going to be a do-it-all number 1 wide receiver that can play X, Z, or slot. I think, for a guy that has a lot of strengths like he does, that kind of fit the mold of being a Z or a slot, that's an appropriate range for him because some of his strengths are really impressive. He is a multi-level separator. I think his route running is potentially the best thing he possesses. He can separate on all 3 levels of the field, can be used in motion on crossers, and pretty devastating regardless as to whether it's an in or out breaker, in my opinion. I think separation is a big part of his game. And once again, when he does have the separation, his hands are really good. His yak ability is also impressive. Not so much the physical yak aspect, but the utilization of blockers, a nasty jump cut, and a really good change of direction ability. One thing I didn't mention, he is good against zone. That is something that I like to see, especially if you're not going to be a boundary X that kind of needs to be able to beat man one-on-one. I think given the usage I project him to get, being good against zone is going to be a huge plus for him. And one thing I really like is he does work with his quarterback in scramble drill and has a good sense and feel for where the players are around him. So I think he's a really intelligent player to be able to do that. Because he can't always look at where everyone is around. You kind of have to have a natural feel for that, and he does have that. And once again, his speed and acceleration are definitely pluses for him. I think he's going to be dangerous once again on all 3 levels of the field. Areas to potentially improve upon: play strength. He has to use wasted movement. Well, he chooses to use wasted movement, be it head fakes or extra steps to beat press coverage. And I think that's to make up for a lack of physical play strength. And then also away from frame catching, the contested catchability of 65%, I think is a little bit inflated in terms of just a raw number. You would think somebody with a 65% would just be a truly dominant player like, Rome Odunze was in college there. But once again, I think that he can make really tough grabs when the ball isn't far away from his frame, but it's kind of when he has to extend out that becomes an issue for him. So in terms of a potential pro comparison, I think he resembles a lot of what Jaden Reed brings to the table. Somebody that's pretty good against zone coverage, can be used in the ground game, is more of an elusive guy rather than a powerful guy. Somebody that can be used as a Z, but probably is going to be used as a slot. I think that that's kind of what we're going to see from Bell at the next level. And as you've seen, especially in Jaden Reed's rookie season, he's kind of dealt with injuries, unfortunately, and so he hasn't really been able to provide some of that upside that we saw, that he can be useful for us in fantasy. So if Bell lands in a good, advantageous situation with the creative play caller and a role that's open, that kind of caters to some of his strengths, I think he could be really useful for us in fantasy. In terms of where I think the dynasty community will probably have him ranked, I think somewhere around wide receiver 100. This is kind of a neutral ranking right now. It could definitely jump up if he gets a good landing spot and good draft capital. But potentially being a third round pick, if that were to happen and it wouldn't be a good landing spot, I don't think the dynasty community as a whole is going to be particularly high on him, no matter what your or my individual opinion is. Where would I take him? Once again, it just depends on the overall draft capital and landing spot. I think somewhere in the second to third round of rookie drafts is going to be appropriate. A couple of potential team fits based on openings that I think he could fit into. I think the Steelers they have DK Metcalf as an X. I think that they could use somebody as a Z or a slot. The Titans, I think, could use wide receiver help across the board at any position. So I definitely think they could use a Z or a slot. The Saints, you have Chris Olave there, but I do think that Bell could fit into that. And they are looking to add at wide receiver, although they are being mocked to potentially get Carnell Tate. If that were to happen, I don't know that they would go for Bell. The Falcons, they lost Darnell Mooney. I think Bell could fit that role for them quite well. And then the Dolphins traded away Jalen Waddle. They're also reasonably likely to take a wide receiver in the first round, but if they don't, or even if they do, I think they could definitely use more depth. And I think that he could easily fit into a slot or Z role for them as well. And so, yeah, those are my thoughts on Skyler Bell. What are yours? Let me know below in the comment section. Is there anything you think I didn't mention that might be noteworthy? Let me know below in the comment section. Once again, thank you to my Patreon members. Without your support, this wouldn't be possible. Thank you. If you would like to become a member, I'm going to leave a link in the description of the video. If you cannot afford to or do not wish to, if you could just like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below, I'd really appreciate it. With all that being said, thanks guys and have a good day.